found me beautiful once.
Honey, you got real ugly.
This story is about the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ Templar Crusader Medieval Renaissance Sword. That's a mouthful. Taking a look at the eBay page, you can actually see that it says that the blade is made of a carbon steel. Of course, the question there is whether or not it's of a high enough quality and if it's been heat treated properly, along with proper construction in the rest of the hilt assembly. It does come with a scabbard though, so at least that's a bonus. Now, most of the times this shows up on eBay being around $70 or so, but again, my goal here was to get it for under $50, and I found one, exact same sword that was being sold at an auction as opposed to a buy it now, and it was being sold for around $40. And so, here it is. Pretty much exactly as pictured. It has a fairly decent scabbard actually. That was probably the most surprising part in terms of quality, but it is more or less a throwaway scabbard. Now, taking a look at the blade itself, the sword blade itself, it's very uneven in its construction. In terms of how the fuller comes out, you can see especially on this side that it actually falls down below the central ridge that they have going. The cross section is a bit strange. It's like a cross between an oval and a diamond cross section. I think that you just count that because it's kind of cheaply made, right? You can't really expect much out of it. The blade does actually bend a bit, but it's not as flexible as you would normally expect, which would suggest that it has actually been heat treated to some extent. The question is whether or not it was quenched properly and whether or not it's as hard as it needs to be. I certainly don't, I'm not too worried about it actually bending and then keeping the bent shape. So that's pretty good. Alright, so we're getting some bonus here, but now let's look at the hilt assembly and see if that holds up. Pretty basic stuff. You can actually see there's a pretty big gap between the blade and the hilt there. Overall, just on the surface level, this begins to look like a very, very poor quality version of like a windlass sword, where the hilt construction seems solid enough, but whereas windlass will have a peened pommel and the properly tempered blade, which will make it worth the price, this one begins to fail. And here's why, and it took me a while to figure this out because this was glued on pretty tight, and I had to work pretty hard to unscrew the pommel. And so now you can already see failing point number one. Again, a screw-on pommel isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as it is properly constructed, but as you're about to see, as I slowly unscrew this, it is not nearly constructed as well as it really needs to be. And you can see it's actually a pretty long nut pommel that's in there, so it goes in pretty far, and it's made fairly well in terms of not just being a little tiny bit of a tang out the side. But here's one of the problems right here. See, that is just a regular nut, and it's been glued into this pommel, and that's a really, really bad thing, right? Taking the handle off, which is going to be difficult, you can see problem number two. And this is it. This is what they call a rat tail tang. And what this means is, and it does, when looking at it, this all looks like one solid piece. So the blade through to the end, even though right here it looks like it might be a little bit welded, you can actually look on the side. You can see it's all one solid piece. So it is a solid blade, but a rat tail tang is not a good tang. It's way too thin. It's way too likely to break. And that, in conjunction with a poor nut pommel, really takes us out of being a functional sword. So it was close, but no cigar, right? So a little bit disappointing. It was probably the best shot that I had for finding a good sword on eBay, I think. It looked very promising. The details of the construction sounded very promising, but ultimately it's going to be inferior to an actual functional sword. And so it is something that, you know, I want to just kind of call out again. There is an expectation when you buy swords on eBay, you're really taking a very, very big risk, because it's very unlikely to be of any high enough quality to actually be functional. And I can already feel that this sword is wanting to fall apart, me just trying to reassemble it. And that's not a very good thing. That's not what you want to see in a sword. So, as I try to reconstruct this, I'll wrap up this video. Again, yet another eBay horror story. Guys, probably should avoid eBay.